Millbrook was the kind of town where nothing changed unless you squinted real hard and imagined it. The streets were clean, lined with modest shops and hanging baskets that bloomed every spring like clockwork. Flags flapped gently from wooden porches, and the same faces passed each other on the same corners day after day. It was the kind of town that wore its comfort like a cardigan worn, but reliable. Officer John Harris knew every crack in its sidewalks, every flickering street lamp, every house where the mail piled up to lawn. For 23 years, he had patrolled the same streets in the same squad car, waving at the same people, and for the last 10 of those years, he had done it all with a hollow ache buried deep in his chest. The absence of Sarah still clung to him like a second uniform. She had been sunshine to his gravel, sharp-witted and warm, with a laugh that could soften the worst of his days. They tried for children, prayed for them, cried over the losses. When she passed, an aneurysm that stole her in silence, it was like their shared dreams had died alongside her. The nursery in their house had been quietly turned into a storage room. His evenings became frozen meals in quiet corners. He never remarried. He never even tried. People respected Officer Harris. He was a dependable fixture in town, a man of few words and firm values, but he was also a ghost in motion. He went to work, went home, and went to sleep, only to repeat the process without a flicker of purpose. Grief had etched lines into his face, but his eyes remained the same, steady, tired, unreadable. Then came the call. It was a cool autumn afternoon. Golden leaves fluttered down Main Street, collecting like scattered pages at the feet of parked cars. John sat in his cruiser near the bakery, sipping stale coffee and pretending to read yesterday's paper. The dispatch cracked through the radio, short, clipped, and urgent. Unit 224. Respond to 1456 Elm Street. Possible child abandonment. Multiple minors. Proceed with caution. John tossed the paper aside. The words multiple minors settled like stones in his gut. He flicked on his lights and made the turn toward Elm, his tires crunching over leaves as the street grew quieter and darker. The house was a shell peeling. Paint, broken shutters, a crooked mailbox hanging by one screw. No lights inside, but the crying that was unmistakable. Faint, fractured, and coming from somewhere deep within. He knocked, called out, "Police! Is anyone home?" No answer. Hand on his holster, he turned the knob and stepped in. The air was musty, laced with the tang of spoiled food and something heavier desperation. There, in the corner of the barren living room, they huddled. 6 girls. The oldest might have been 11 or 12. The youngest couldn't have been more than 2. Barefoot, wide-eyed, their hair in braids unraveling, their clothes wrinkled and stained. They stared at him like he was a storm, or a savior, or both. The oldest stepped forward, her chin trembling. "Our parents," she whispered. "They didn't come back. There was an accident. We've been waiting." John knelt slowly, his breath caught somewhere in his throat. He looked at them, hungry, frightened, broken, and something split open inside him. A space that had been sealed shut for a decade cracked without warning. Child Protective Services would come. He knew the drill. These girls would be separated, scattered like leaves in the wind. The system wasn't built to keep 6 siblings together, let alone 6 black girls in a town like Millbrook. He stood there, surrounded by their silence, his radio buzzing faintly on his shoulder, and then, without fully understanding where it came from, he heard himself say aloud, "What if I took them?" The headlines never printed the full story. The local paper ran a small blurb the following morning: "Officer adopts 6 orphan girls after tragedy." A feel-good piece nestled between a church bake sale and a tractor parade, but no one printed what came next. No one wrote about the cold dinners gone uneaten, or the midnight crying fits, or the silent stares from neighbors who didn't understand what they were seeing. A single white cop bringing 6 little black girls into his home like it was normal, like it was nothing. It wasn't nothing. The town watched, quietly, suspiciously. Some, like Mrs. Thompson from the flower shop, smiled politely, but crossed the street when the girls ran by laughing too loud. Others weren't so subtle. Whispers slithered through grocery store aisles, between church pews. Is he trying to make a statement? Can he even raise them right? Where's the mother figure? John Harris heard every word, whether they were spoken to his face or not, but the louder noise came from inside his own house. His once quiet home had transformed into a living, breathing storm of confusion and noise. Shoes scattered in the hallway. Dolls lined the stairs like sentries. Drawings, taped to the fridge in crooked pride. And yet, every corner hummed with tension as if all 7 of them were waiting for this whole thing to fall apart. Amara, the eldest at 12, tried to take on the weight of a mother she barely remembered. She moved like she was already grown, brushing Jasmine's hair in the mornings, packing lunches with methodical grace. But her eyes, sharp and watchful, never stopped scanning. She didn't trust easily. Simone was quieter. She drew in the margins of her notebooks, sketched her sisters when they weren't looking, and stared at John with a mix of curiosity and hesitation, as if trying to figure out which box to put him in. Tiana, 10 years old, and all fire refused to call him anything but Harris. She challenged him daily: bedtime, homework, the kind of cereal in the pantry. Once, she told him flatly, "You ain't my dad. Don't act like you know what I need." He didn't argue, because in truth, he did in single quotes T.Zoe read constantly, sat at the kitchen table with borrowed books stacked high beside her plate, too immersed in fantasy to acknowledge the chaos around her. Lila loved attention, whether it was through song, dance, or drama, singing off-key in the living room or crying over mismatched socks. Jasmine, the baby, barely spoke the first few weeks. She just watched him, silently, as if waiting to see if he'd leave the dot. He tried. God, he tried. He learned to detangle curls, fumbling through YouTube tutorials at 2 a.m. with a dull head and a borrowed brush. He learned how to stretch a grocery budget 6 ways and how to translate their silences, tantrums, and tears into something like progress. But it wasn't enough. The real fracture came one night, 3 months in, when the power went out during a storm. The lights flickered and vanished, plunging the house into darkness. A clap of thunder shook the walls, and suddenly the hallway erupted in screams. John bolted from the kitchen, flashlight in hand, only to find all 6 girls huddled in the living room, crying, trembling, clutching each other like a lifeboat. He stood there, stunned. "It's just a storm," he said softly. "It's gonna pass." But Amara shook her head violently. "That's what Mama said," she whispered. "She said we'd be fine. She said she'd come home." Something in her broke open then, raw and real. The other girls clung to her, and John realized this wasn't about thunder or lightning. This was trauma, left over and unhealed. These weren't just orphans. These were 6 hearts wrapped in layers of grief and fear. He sat down on the floor, beside them, flashlight between them, unsure of what to say. "I don't have the right words," he admitted, "but I'm not leaving." For the first time, they didn't pull away when he reached for them. They leaned in, cautiously, even Tiana. Jasmine curled into his lap and finally spoke. "Promise." He looked at her, the beam of the flashlight catching the shimmer of her eyes. "I promise," he said. The storm passed by morning. The power returned, but something else had shifted, something deeper. Still, the town didn't see it. They didn't see how he cried alone after they went to bed, fearing he was failing them, or how he kept Sarah's picture in the hallway so the girls could know who dreamed them into existence long before they arrived. They didn't see him ask for help at the beauty shop down the road, or how he humbled himself at the black church on 8th Street just to understand them better. But the girls noticed. Slowly, piece by piece, Amara left him a note on the fridge. Just 3 words: "You're trying. Thanks. And though the battle was far from over, it was the first crack in the dam. They were becoming something messy, something unexpected, something fragile, but real. Family. And still, in the quiet hours of the night, John would lie awake asking the same question over and over again. What if I can't love them the way they need? But he'd get up the next morning, brew the coffee, pack the lunches, brush Jasmine's curls lopsided, but better each time, and face the world again. Not because he had all the answers, but because, maybe for the first time since Sarah died, he had something to lose. By the 3rd year, the house on Ashwood Lane no longer felt like a stranger's home. It breathed now. It laughed and argued and echoed with music and footsteps and the rustle of braids in motion. There were birthday banners still taped to walls, long after the party, and family photos finally hung in crooked frames. John, always surrounded by a sea of brown faces, smiling but unsure, trying to the untrained eye. It looked like they'd figured it all out. A success story. A white cop who raised 6 black girls, beating the odds and the statistics. But from the inside, the cracks were still there, thin, dangerous fault lines under the surface, waiting. The trouble began subtly. Simone came home one afternoon with tear-stained cheeks and red eyes she tried to hide behind her sketchbook. John had seen that look before. On Sarah's face after miscarriages, the face of someone trying to hold herself together with a thread. "What happened, sweetheart?" he asked, crouching beside her. She shrugged. "Nothing." He waited. Then she looked up and whispered, "Some kids at school said I was only adopted because you felt sorry for us. They said white people like to collect black kids now, like trophies." John felt a cold anger rise in his chest, but he swallowed it. His hands clenched into fists behind his back. "That's not true," he said carefully. "You know that." She nodded, but her eyes were hollow. I don't always know where I fit." That phrase haunted him for days. Where I fit died wasn't long before Tiana exploded. She had grown into a fiercely talented basketball player, fast, focused, brilliant. But she came home after practice one day and slammed her backpack against the wall, so hard a picture frame cracked. When John followed her to her room, she was already throwing jerseys into a drawer, her hands trembling. "I'm quitting," she snapped. John blinked. "What? Why?" She turned on him, her face flushed with fury. "You don't get it. I'm tired of being the only black girl on the court, the one they call aggressive when I play hard. I'm tired of the stares, the questions, the wow, that's your dad looks. I don't belong there. I don't belong anywhere." John stepped forward, but she backed away. "You think just showing up makes you my father? You think love is enough?" she shouted. "You can't teach me how to be black in a world that hates me." The silence that followed her words was louder than the outburst. John stood frozen, not because he didn't care, but because he suddenly realized something. She was right. He couldn't teach her what he didn't know. He could protect, provide, and try, but he would never live in her skin, never face what she faced. That night, he sat alone in the darkened hallway outside her door, hearing muffled sobs he couldn't fix. He didn't try to knock. He didn't offer cheap reassurances. Instead, he sat there and listened. The next morning, he did something no one in Millbrook expected. He took a leave of absence from the force, walked into the precinct and handed his badge to Mike, his longtime partner, and simply said, "I need to learn how to be their dad." Mike stared, stunned. "You already are." John shook his head. "No, I'm trying to be. There's a difference." He didn't know what to do at first, so he started small. He called Mother Henrietta. She greeted him with her usual mix of kindness and steel. "Took you long enough," she said. "Come by the church Wednesday night. We're holding a community forum on parenting black youth. Don't say a word, just sit and listen." So he did. He sat in a circle of black parents, aunties, and uncles, absorbing every story of fear, resilience, exhaustion, rage. He heard about the talk they gave their children about surviving traffic stops, about how beauty gets policed in black girls, about how code switching wasn't a skill, but survival. He took notes, filled journals. He cried in his truck, outside afterward, gutted by what he hadn't seen. He started attending a mentorship program where black fathers shared their wisdom. He learned how to affirm, not just protect his daughters' identities, how to talk about color, not avoid it, how to validate their anger, how to acknowledge that love doesn't erase injustice. At home, things didn't change overnight. Tiana still moved around him like a hurricane, volatile and unpredictable. But one day, after weeks of silence, she tossed a note onto his lap during breakfast. It said only 2 words, "You stayed." That night, she asked him, "Do you know what microaggressions are?" "I do," he said. "I didn't before. I do now." Tiana nodded. Then, softly, "Okay, then maybe we can talk." And they did, for hours. About things John never dared bring up before. About Trayvon. About hair. Politics. About what it felt like when police sirens made them anxious even though their father wore the badge. Each girl, in her own time, opened the door. Simone drew a mural on the garage wall of their family as superheroes, all different shades, all standing strong together. Zoe gave him a book titled "Why Are All the Black Kids Sitting Together in the Cafeteria?" and told him it was required reading. Leela brought him to a protest downtown, where he held a sign that read, "Love is action." Jasmine asked him to do her hair again, and this time, she smiled afterward, and Amara, stoic, guarded Amara, looked at him during dinner one night and said, "You used to be a cop, but now you're something more." "What's that?" he asked, a student. That year, John Harris was reborn. not as a perfect father, but as a present one. And just when it felt like their fragile new foundation was solidifying, fate knocked. Again, but this time, it would test the very bond they had built. Because on the cusp of healing, John's body betrayed him. The cough started small, brushed off as fatigue. But soon, it echoed louder than any siren, and the girls, once broken children he had pieced back together, would be forced to face a truth even harder than their past. They might lose the only man who had ever stayed. John Harris had always been the steady one, the anchor, the beat cop with a steel spine and a quiet heart. For 2 decades, he poured himself into raising 6 girls who came into his life as frightened strangers and now stood strong, stunning, unshakable as women. But even anchors rust. Even the strongest hands begin to shake. It started with a cough, not the kind that came and went, but the kind that settled in your chest like it paid rent. John shrugged it off. Seasonal. Nothing serious. He told himself that every morning as he hacked into a tissue and every night as his breath wheezed, like wind pushing through a broken fence. Then came the fatigue. He could no longer make it through an entire family dinner without excusing himself to lie down. When Leela gave a fiery speech at her student council rally, he clapped politely but kept sitting because standing made the world tilt sideways. He missed Zoe's scholarship award night. Amara noticed. So did Jasmine, who found him asleep at 4 p.m. with his shoes still on. But John said nothing. He had survived grief, racism, judgment, bureaucracy, and raising 6 daughters in a town that once whispered behind his back. He wasn't going to let a little cough knock him off course. Until it did. It was a Saturday afternoon, warm and golden. They were throwing a backyard barbecue to celebrate Zoe's acceptance into an elite writing residency. John was at the grill, flipping burgers and laughing at one of Simone's jokes. The yard buzzed with joy music, sisters teasing each other, Jasmine running barefoot through the grass. And then everything slowed. The laughter seemed to stretch, warping at the edges. John's vision narrowed. His knees buckled, and the world spun like a carousel gone mad. The spatula clattered to the ground as he clutched the side of the grill, gasping for air. Amara's voice was the last thing he heard before everything went black. Dad, Dad. When he woke, the lights were to white, to sterile. Machines beeped in rhythm with his heartbeat. His daughters were huddled around the bed like they'd taken shifts in grief. Amara was still in her work blazer, eyes puffy and fierce. Tiana was pacing like a caged lion. Jasmine was curled up in a hospital chair, her cheek resting on the blanket near his feet. He tried to speak, but the words were caught behind the mask strapped over his face. A nurse walked in, and the hum of conversation returned. Stage 3 lung cancer. The words hit the girls like a hurricane. Amara asked questions with clinical precision. Simone buried her face in her hands. Leela went quiet. Zoe whispered, "But he doesn't even smoke." And Jasmine just cried like her whole world was leaking out through her eyes. John watched them all from the bed, helpless. "I didn't tell you." He croaked through the oxygen. "I didn't want to be a burden." Tiana snapped. "A burden? Are you kidding me? You carried all of us for 20 years and you think this makes you a burden?" No one left that hospital room. They took turns, organized shifts. Amara set up folders, medical binders, appointment calendars. Simone brought paints and covered the hospital walls with murals of their life, a porch swing, a little girl with pigtails, a white man braiding black hair badly. Zoe brought stacks of books, reading aloud everything from James Baldwin to sci-fi. Leela started a fundraising campaign for lung cancer awareness and raised more in 3 weeks than the town's 4th of July parade ever had, and Jasmine never left his side. She was his constant tender, soft-spoken, but unshakably present. Tiana, who had once been his angriest child, became his shield. She took him walking every day, even when he could barely make it to the mailbox. She challenged the nurses, grilled the doctors, called out the oncologist when he mispronounced their names. She became his voice when his own failed. One day, as they walked slowly down the hospital corridor, Tiana stopped him. "You remember when I said love wasn't enough?" she asked quietly. He nodded. "I was wrong," she said. "Love is enough. Your love was enough, and now it's our turn." He didn't respond, just squeezed her hand. Words felt small in a moment like that. Chemo was held. His hair fell out, his body wasted. There were nights he couldn't keep down water, but every time he looked up from that hospital bed, there they were, his girls, his daughters. No longer the little ones he rescued, but warriors molded in his image. He had taught them how to fight, and now they were fighting for him. One evening, in the darkest part of treatment, he asked them all to come close. The hospital room was dim, but the glow from the city outside lit their faces. "I don't know how this ends," he said, "but if I go, you need to know, I didn't save you. You saved me every day. You were the light I didn't know I needed." They didn't cry. Not that night. They just held him, all 6 of them, their bodies tangled around his like the roots of a tree that refused to fall. And in that silence, John Harris made them a promise, not with words, but with the look in his eyes, the breath in his lungs. If he had to crawl his way back from the edge of death just to see their futures unfold, he would. He would fight for every second, because now they were no longer his daughters in name only. They were his legacy. And he wasn't done yet. The 5th year cancer-free came quietly. There were no balloons, no official doctor's announcement, no parade, just a date circled in red on the calendar, April 19th, written in Simone's looping script, marked with a small heart beside it. John Harris woke that morning to the sound of birds outside his window, the kind of chirping that always reminded him of spring in Millbrook. The sky was gentle, cloudless. He sat up slowly, the echo of his old pain still haunting his bones, but dulled now like a storm finally breaking. Behind the mountains, the girls know. The women, they hadn't said anything. No mention of a party or celebration. They had each texted him simple messages that morning. "Love you, Dad. Hope you're resting today. We're proud of you." He wasn't disappointed. Truth be told, part of him was relieved. The last 5 years had been a whirlwind of chemo sessions, hospital stays, the humbling reality of depending on his daughters for everything. Even now, despite his strength returning in waves, he could feel time stalking him like a patient hunter. In the woods, every breath came with gratitude. Every heartbeat was borrowed. So when Amara called to say they had planned a small family dinner at the community center, he didn't think twice, just smiled, put on a pressed shirt, and combed his thinning hair. "You're not dressing up for me, are you?" Amara teased when she picked him up. "I'm just trying not to look like I crawled out of a retirement brochure." He grunted. She laughed, a warm, soft sound, but her hands were gripping the wheel tightly. He didn't notice. They pulled up to the community center just after sunset. The parking lot was full. John squinted. "There's something going on tonight." Amara shrugged, her lips twitching in a failed attempt to hide her smile. "Might be a bingo night or something." He raised an eyebrow, but said nothing. As they walked toward the building, she gently slipped her hand into his. The door opened, and the air shifted. The first thing John noticed was the sound of bursts of voices shouting surprise, like thunder rolling through the room. He stopped cold. The place was packed wall to wall with faces he hadn't seen in years. Neighbors, former colleagues, old friends from the precinct, even people who once crossed the street to avoid him when he walked hand in hand with his daughters. They were all here. Above the stage hung a massive banner. John Harris, a life of love, a legacy of family. Confused, stunned, he turned to Amara. What is this?" But before she could answer, Simone stepped onto the stage, a spotlight warming her face. Her voice cracked through the microphone with practiced ease. "Good evening, everyone. Tonight, we honor a man who didn't just take in 6 girls, he transformed 6 lives, and in doing so, he changed hundreds more." The room fell still as one by one, each sister stepped forward to share their story. Tiana spoke first, fiery and fierce. "I hated you," she admitted, her voice unapologetic. "Not because of you, but because I didn't know how to be loved by someone I didn't understand. You broke yourself open trying to understand us, and in that breaking, you taught me what strength really was." Leela, emotional and radiant, shared how John's quiet, stubborn faith in her voice pushed her into activism. Zoe read an original poem titled "Man Without a Map," about a father raising daughters in a world built to divide them. Jasmine, fighting back tears, called him her safe place, the first man she ever trusted to stay. And then came Simone's video. The lights dimmed, a massive screen lowered. It was a mosaic of memories, home videos, birthday parties, hospital visits, awkward school plays. Then came the testimonials. A woman from Child Protective Services. John Harris challenged every part of the system. And one, Mother Henrietta. He didn't know our ways, but he asked and he listened. That's what makes a good man. Mike, his old partner, visibly choked up. "I used to think I was the tough one. But John showed me what real courage looked like, real love, then clips of strangers. Young people from across the country, one by one, they appeared on screen because of John Harris. My siblings and I were adopted together. My mom read his story and decided to foster for the first time. The foundation he inspired helped me go to college. John's knees buckled. He sank into the nearest chair, his hands trembling. He looked around the room, tears in every eye, love in every face. But it wasn't over. Amara stepped forward again, holding a large folder wrapped in ribbon. She knelt beside him. Dad, we know you never did any of this for praise. You did it out of love, and we will never be able to repay that. But we can continue it. She opened the folder. John squinted at the bold lettering at the top. The John Harris Foundation for Foster Youth and Transracial Family Estate mission was printed clearly beneath it. To keep siblings together, to fund transracial parenting education, to provide scholarships for youth aging out of care, to redefine what family can look like. John stared at the page, unable to speak. We've secured nonprofit status, Amara continued. Local businesses contributed, state grants, even national donors. Everything's in motion. You've changed our lives. Now we want to help you change others. He pressed the folder to his chest like it was oxygen. The applause was thunderous. But in his ears it was muted, distant, like everything else faded. And the only thing real was the pressure of his daughter's hands on his shoulders, the pride swelling in his chest like something holy. His voice was hoarse, cracking. You didn't have to. Tiana stepped in, finishing his sentence. We know. That's why we did. And in that moment, under the warm lights of a room filled with every soul he'd touched, John Harris realized something profound. He hadn't just raised 6 girls. He had raised a movement, a family that would stretch beyond blood, beyond borders, a love too big for one lifetime, and it was just beginning. The porch swing creaked softly beneath John Harris as he watched the early morning fog roll across Millbrook. The years had weathered him. His hands bore tremors now. His voice was thinner. The cough still lingered like a ghost, but his eyes still carried the same quiet resolve, the same steel forged in the fire of loss, love, and the unwavering duty of a father. His daughters were all home. He could hear them through the open window, laughing in the kitchen, arguing over pancakes and whose playlist to use for the morning. That sound, it was everything. It was the heartbeat of a legacy he never meant to build, but one he would leave behind with reverence. Amara, now 32, was the director of child services for the entire state. Fierce, unshakable, with eyes that missed nothing, he often called her commander, though she never heard it as a joke. She wore her purpose like a uniform, carved from the belief that no child should be lost in a system built to forget them. Simone, 30, had turned her art into testimony. Her work, vivid, haunting, magnificent, was now housed in museums, universities, and healing centers. Her latest exhibit, Family Forged, depicted the journey of 6 girls into womanhood through the eyes of the man who raised them. Tiana had traded her basketball jersey for a coach's whistle. At 28, she ran the women's athletics program at a local college, shaping athletes not just into competitors, but into fighters for equity, dignity, and strength. Zoe, 26, was now a 2-time published author. Her latest novel, a semi-fictional account of their childhood, was longlisted for a national literary prize. Her writing had become their family's voice in a world that still often refused to hear it. Layla, 25, had become the youngest city councilwoman in Millbrook's history. She stood behind podiums that once sneered at their presence and spoke truth without apology. And Jasmine, the youngest, now 24, wore her police badge not as armor, but as a bridge. She had joined the very department her father had once served, determined to become the kind of cop who listens first, protects always, and heals when needed most. John blinked back, tears. This wasn't just pride. It was awe. A generation born in trauma had grown into architects of change. Then he heard her footsteps, hurried and deliberate. The porch door creaked open. Dad, Tiana said, breathless, you have to come inside. He turned slowly, expecting another brunch surprise or maybe one of Simone's impromptu poetry readings. Instead, he found all 6 of them standing in the living room, circled around something small, woven bassinet. Tiana stepped aside, revealing the child inside, a baby, soft skin, tiny fists, eyes like galaxies, wide open. We wanted to wait until today, Amara said. The 25th anniversary. John's heart thudded in his chest. Wait, what? Tiana gently lifted the baby into his arms, tears brimming in her eyes. Her name is Sarah. John nearly dropped her. Simone stepped forward, her voice cracking with reverence. She's named after Mom, the mom we never met, but the woman who dreamed us into your heart. She's part of this too. Leela smiled through tears. We wanted the first of the next generation to carry her name, because without her, none of this happens. John looked down at the baby in his arms. Her tiny hand gripped his finger. With more strength than he thought possible, Sarah. He hadn't spoken that name aloud in years, but now it sang through his chest like gospel. He sat in the rocker, the same one he kept in the attic after Sarah's passing, the one he'd never brought himself to give away. Now it held something new, a legacy reborn. As the sun poured through the windows, John rocked back and forth, holding the child who would one day learn how love had carved a family from ash. His daughters sat around him, each one radiating strength, resilience, and the quiet, unmistakable proof of his life's greatest work. Girls, he said softly, his voice cracked with gratitude. I used to think I adopted you, but I see now, you chose me to. No one spoke, words felt too small. Then Zoe handed him a leather-bound book. His name was stamped in gold foil across the front, Love Beyond Color. The story of an unlikely family. He flipped through the pages, their story, his story laid bare. It was all there, the patrol call, the stormy nights, the barbecues, the hospital, the foundation, the laughter and the heartbreak, and everything in between. It had already gone to print. Publishers wanted a national release, book tours, interviews, screenplay options. John just held the book in one hand and the child in the other. This, he whispered, this is too much. Tiana leaned in and kissed his temple. No, Dad, this is just right. Later that evening, under the soft hum of porch lights and the buzz of cicadas, the family gathered once more. No speeches, no surprises, just wine, music, and the kind of laughter that comes from surviving together. John stared out into the horizon, the stars beginning to pierce the sky, and as he rocked little Sarah in his arms, he thought of the night he walked into that abandoned house 25 years ago, 6 pairs of terrified eyes looking up at him. No one had seen them as a family. No one but him. And now the world saw what love could do when it was relentless. Millbrook had changed. The country was still trying. But here, on this porch, in the arms of daughters and granddaughters, John Harris found a kind of peace he never thought he'd live long enough to feel. He wasn't just a father. He was a seed planter, a bridge builder, a movement maker. And as Sarah's eyes fluttered closed against his chest, he whispered the words only she could hear. Love made us, and love will carry you next.